As a Catholic, of course, I believe that God somehow, in some way, created everything, the universe that we see here, the multiverse. In college, that was when I really studied deeper the Bible and Genesis and trying to really pick it apart, trying to decode it, trying not decode, but like trying to understand it in a deep way than I ever had before. And I started going through this process of trying to interpret the language of the Bible in modern scientific terminology, trying to take modern scientific concepts that I learned in my biology and chemistry classes and trying to see where that could possibly fit in the first few paragraphs of Genesis, the creation of the world. Because, the beautiful thing about the Bible, and to many people's detriment, it can be interpreted in so many different ways.
We've had these conversations before, and how maybe the creation story in itself is just a representation of what people could understand at that time,
Yeah.
what creation was. Supposedly, the Bible has had revelations of, different things that are happening today, right? Some people have said that there's mentions of, big birds flying in the sky, which could maybe be translated to airplanes, but back then they just didn't know the concept of an airplane, or didn't
Yes.
know various scientific concepts that now, and they, after research, we kind of put a term to it. But people back then, they could only explain it in the way that they could with what they knew.
The words that they used back then are different than the words we have now. There's words now that didn't even exist back then, especially even in that language. There's science. There's so many. Science didn't exist until a certain period of time with the positivism movement, and then it moved to a less strict post-positivism movement, where it went more into subjective, qualitative experimental research. But all these scientific terms that we've come to create, they've only just existed within the past few thousands of years that we've lived. And so of course the language of the Bible isn't going to include scientific terminology. You couldn't expect it to, because those words did not exist.
The Bible kind of mentions that, God created Adam from the soil, from the sand,
Right. And
you
then I
know.
was telling you, like,
And
what is
what,
the
if you think
soil?
about it, like, I know, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
What is
the sand could just be a representation of the smallest particle that people could perceive with their eyes.
which is the
But maybe what they were really trying to say is that God made us from the same substance as the earth, which is particles,
which everything
molecules,
around us
atoms.
is made of what you're saying, atoms, and then particles make up atoms.
Like dirt itself gives life to plants, which in turn gives life to animals. It's almost like, soil back then was the provider of life.
Where do we get this information from? We get it from the Bible. Where's the information from the Bible? And of course, as me and you as Catholics, we believe it comes from God. But like, deeper than that, where does it come from? If we believe that the information comes from a deity, from God, from this being, as far as I understand it, the Bibles started out with word of mouth, and then it evolved into written language, and now it's become translated into the Bible we have today. Was this information was it revealed through visions? Was it revealed through dreams? We can even think of like Adam and Eve lived, right? And they spoke a language because God created in that way, as it says in the Bible, and they spoke words. And so the story of Adam and Eve would be carried on by their children that they had, and then their children's children would carry on that story, and that would be that word of mouth that keep continuing amongst the generations of generations until it finally gets written down. If that's the case, then Adam and Eve's children and Adam and Eve themselves were the eyewitness testimony, I first, eyewitnesses of God creating the earth and them. I could see how someone would come in there and say during this word of mouth, or you just say it was all made up, or say, oh, it just got exaggerated along the way by the first beings that existed on earth.
It talks about the world being created in 7 days, right? But what does 7 days mean in God's time? 7 million years, 7 billion years? When you drop something in water and it creates those waves,
Right. The
and it
chain
keeps
reaction. Yeah.
expanding, like the Big Bang might have been words coming out of God's mouth into existence.
Words, sound, wavelengths of sound themselves are vibrations. And we were talking about how maybe God's voice, a specific vibration of the universe, was enough like if you want to dive into string theory, I think that's what we're talking about. Like string theory says there's these tiny vibrating strings that make up the atoms that make up everything. So
Yeah,
like what if certain vibrations vibrate those strings in a certain way to produce certain particles, which produce certain atoms, which produce certain forms and things we see around us? And what if God's voice is that vibration that vibrates those strings, the theoretical
yeah,
strings of string theory that, then create the different types of particles, which create the different types of atoms? Because vibrations do affect reality. We couldn't hear each other
yeah.
without vibration.
If somebody can organize vibration, and use it to their advantage, then they can actually create things, like maybe even I'm wondering if maybe if you change the vibration of something, it can become, turn water into wine.
'Cause if that would just be a matter of changing the number of, what was it, protons and electrons or something like that. Because, the periodic table of elements is just
Mm,
literally the difference between two atoms could be one or less electrons and protons and such like that make up the atom. Like that's, you change one and it completely changes the element. It's mind blowing.
there's actual scientists that have studied water. They went to look at in a microscope the molecules of the water. So the molecules in the water that had negative energy and bad words thrown at it, it was just regular, disorganized, just water itself. But the other water that, had positive emotions, good words, actually had some geographic figures, like almost as crystals, right? It formed geometric features,
Sure.
exerting emotion, exerting words, had such a big impact on how the molecules had formed,
Yeah, and the reason why,
right?
because it goes right back to God's word, like words. The thing is, it's debatable because is that just a metaphor, God speaking and then this happening? Like, what do we really mean? Do we mean he's literally saying, or is he using vibrations, or is it just to break down the complexity of what's really happening, what God's really doing? Because our human minds aren't capable of even comprehending what creation would even look like or be like.